Andrea, I'm so glad to be talking to you. The first thing that we'll talk about is, you know, you coming into this coding program. I think your perspective is very common with many, which is that you heard about coding, you knew it was cool, um, you were interested in exploring it, but what's interesting in your exploration is that you did not necessarily decide you wanted to be a developer. And I think that is a really interesting thing to dive into because a lot of folks assume if you do some kind of coding intensive program that you have to become a software engineer, a web developer. But you are proof that you don't have to do that. Talk a little bit
Yeah.
more about that.
Yeah. So, when I went into the boot camp, I went into it because I was interested in coding, I was interested in technology, and I was interested in learning more. But as I went through it, and especially during the job search after, I realized that there's lots of different ways that you can work with technology, and I kind of wish I would have explored that earlier on in the boot camp. Like I wish I would have had that epiphany earlier on. It's, there's many different ways. You can be a project manager, you can be a tech support person. And so there's lots of different avenues that you can take. And I think, at least in my mind, when I first went into the boot camp, I pigeonholed myself into, well, I'm doing this, so I need to become a software engineer or a web developer. And I think that definitely made my job search in the beginning much more difficult.
How did you then land on what you're doing? And why don't you share? Why don't you share your first
Yeah.
role, post the program?
Yeah, so I'm joining a company called Binder as a tech support engineer. I think really the support from Stack is what really kind of, at least after the boot camp, what kind of showed me the different ways that I could go. Because I don't think that I would have necessarily stumbled across like those roles had I just been, searching on my own. And so I think just finding people that know about the industry and know like the different ways that you can work in the industry is really, really helpful and important.
It's so great to hear, and it's so great to hear your process too, because there are so many people that are trying to figure out what's next. They've heard a lot about coding because coding is sexy. They're interested in exploring it, but they don't realize that in learning this skill set, it actually opens you up to, I've seen, at least 10 different job titles, that people can pursue with this skill set. It's just not one title. Now, another perspective that I think is so uniquely you, is that, you are a mother, you have two wonderful kids, and you've been a stay-at-home mom for just about 2.5, 3 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
I know that your background is actually very similar to many students we have in our program, and they're stay-at-home parents, right? Caretaking has been the most important and the hardest job that they've embarked upon, and then they're looking for something new. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your story there?
In the beginning, there was a little bit of a sense of guilt. And I think that's something, especially with the pandemic, like women felt more obligated maybe to stay home and to, take care of their kids and their
Yeah.
family because, everyone has different circumstances. But it either made more sense for them financially, whatever it is. But going back into the workforce, I think there's going to be a difficult time there just because even if it's only a year that you've spent at home, there's a little bit of a sense of guilt that you're leaving your family and like doing something for yourself. And that's something that I've had, it's something that I've thought a lot about recently is like, I'm not necessarily going back into the workforce to, make more money or to, support financially. And, part of that is great. I want to do that, but like, I'm really joining the workforce because I want to, because it's something that I want to do, that I feel like it's very fulfilling for me. And I think that's really, I think what people need to focus on is that you did this for your family. Like you took this burden on, and you left something that you may have loved to take care of them, and it's okay. Like, you don't have to feel guilty about it. You're doing something to better yourself.
Is that such a powerful reframing, really understanding and acknowledging and confronting the guilt, as you said, and then instead of running away from it, trying to think about, well, no, like I'm going to counter the guilt with understanding that I made a sacrifice before that I'm glad I did, but it was a sacrifice. And now this is a way to even that out. It's my turn. Now, let
Yeah.
me ask you the nitty gritty then. So this was an intensive program. There are also other intensive programs out there. You're learning a new skill, you're trying to change your job, but you're also, full-time caretaker for your kids. This is difficult. Do you have, any tangible advice for folks who are about to do that or are kind of embarking on that kind of program?
As far as like going into like an intensive program like this, I definitely find one that works for your schedule. That was a big, big piece for me. But also making sure to designate time for yourself. That's something that I definitely struggled with throughout the program, is, making sure that I have set aside time for me to better myself and continue my learning. As I went, it obviously got better, once I figured out what I needed and stuff. But I think as far as the program goes, like that's my biggest advice, is make sure that you figure out what you need and you set time aside for that. Like you can't let everything else kind of push what you want to do out of the way. Every day there's some new technology, there's something new to learn. So it's not just 1 year I can learn everything I need to know and be successful for the rest of my life. It's an ongoing journey, it's an ongoing learning experience. And so like, and that's something that resonated with me. I love learning and stuff like that. And so like being able to have the ability to continue that growth forever is very exciting.
So this is now, I'm going to dovetail it, and maybe you've already captured this. We always like to ask, if you think about your younger self, what would you tell your younger self, knowing
You
what you
know,
know now?
thinking back to myself before, like I went to my traditional 4-year college, this is something I've thought about a lot, because there is a lot that I didn't know and that no one like took the time to tell me, which, they obviously didn't know what I didn't know. So like that's totally fine. But I was told, like, you go to a 4-year college, you get a job, you're successful. That's just the path.
Yes.
I spent 4 years at college and didn't do anything with my degree, because I didn't realize what, I knew what I liked, and like I went into that and I still like it, but looking at the careers that I could have went into, I was like, this is not what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so spending some time thinking about that, taking some time off, or something like, just explore before you dive in.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. That's great. That is great. That is great. Um, Advice to tell younger selves, and also to other folks who are thinking about what's next. And so I'm going to end with this question, and we're going to ask everyone this in Voices of Stack. But, what advice would you give to others who are about to navigate a professional inflection point?
Yeah, you know, changing careers is definitely difficult, uh, especially if you're just trying to make a full like jump. I think the biggest thing, and it was a little hard for me at first, because I came from a management background. Like, I'm not bottom of the totem pole. You can't just jump straight across. You can't just take yourself out and plop yourself someplace else. And so that was difficult for me to grapple with right away, that I would have to kind of take a step back. But it was also, once I got over that, it was very empowering to know that, like, it's okay. It's like, especially if you're changing what you're doing completely, it's okay. I think the other thing that I would say is that it's best to find kind of a middle ground to start. So like a bridge, something to bridge the gap a little bit, I think is going to be easier. And that's kind of where I found myself with this career that I'm going into, um, is that you can bridge the gap and then move into that space that you want to be in. That it might just take a little longer, but if it's where you want to go, it's okay to take the time.
Andrea,
Yeah.
thank you so much. It's so great that you were able to share your story about, why learning the specific skill coding actually led to multiple career paths, that you encourage others to think about too, if they're learning the skill. Your perspective on being, a full-time parent, full-time caregiver of your kids, and how do you navigate the guilt and reclaim parts of your identity that you've put in the back burner, and really advocating for others to do that as well. And then, of course, that you have the advice you have for those, thinking about how to navigate their professional inflection point. So thank you so much for sharing. You've really, your voice and your perspective is so important here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to let me share. I do hope it helps somebody in the future.
I have no doubt it will. I have no doubt.